Imagine looking up at the night sky, and instead of seeing a pale moon and a sprinkle of stars, you saw enormous glowing arcs stretching across the heavens. Not faint wisps of light like the Milky Way, but massive bright rings dominating the sky. If Earth had rings like Saturn, the world would look unimaginably different, and so would our history. First, let's talk about visibility. Saturn's rings are mostly made of ice and rock, and if Earth had them, they would reflect sunlight brilliantly. Depending on where you lived, the rings could be a permanent feature in your sky. In the tropics, you'd see them rising straight up into the air, a towering rainbow like band cutting across the horizon. In the higher latitudes, they'd look more like a curved arch stretching above you. And at the poles, you wouldn't see them at all, which might make Arctic and Antarctic explorers feel left out. Now, this wouldn't just be a pretty sight. The rings would change culture and history forever. Ancient civilizations were obsessed with the heavens. Think about how much influence the moon had on mythology, calendars, and religion. Now imagine adding massive glowing bands in the sky, visible every night, every day, to every farmer, sailor, and philosopher. Entire mythologies would have been built around the rings. Maybe the Egyptians would think they were the arms of a god stretching across the sky. Maybe the Mayans would see them as a cosmic ladder to another world. And astrologers, well, they'd never shut up. But besides changing culture, the rings would also affect science and technology. Navigation, for example. Sailors once relied on stars to travel. With giant glowing arcs in the sky, the rings could serve as a cosmic compass. Depending on how they shifted through the year, they might even be more reliable than stars. And don't forget timekeeping. The phases of the moon gave us months, but the movement and shadows of the rings might have inspired entirely different calendars. Maybe instead of months, we'd talk about ring cycles. All right, but what about the downside? Rings are not stable forever. On Saturn, they're maintained by small shepherd moons and constant gravitational tug of war. On Earth, our moon would play a big role. Its gravity would constantly pull at the rings, distorting them, possibly even tearing chunks away. That means our rings might not last billions of years like Saturn's. They could break down over tens of millions, still long enough for human history, but eventually doomed to collapse. And then there's the problem of space junk. Saturn's rings are mostly icy particles, but Earth's rings would probably be made of rock from a shattered moon or asteroid. That means lots of debris. Some of it would eventually fall into Earth's atmosphere, burning up as bright streaks across the sky. That sounds beautiful, but if bigger chunks fell, we'd be in trouble. Imagine living in a world where meteor showers weren't just yearly spectacles, but a weekly hazard. The insurance companies would hate this. There's also the climate to consider. Rings reflect sunlight. Depending on how thick and wide they were, Earth's rings could block a significant amount of light from reaching the surface. Parts of the planet under the shadow of the rings might be noticeably cooler. Imagine permanent twilight zones stretching across certain latitudes. Agriculture in those areas could struggle, while regions outside the shadow might thrive. Human migration patterns could have been shaped not just by rivers and mountains, but by where the rings cast their shade. At night, the rings would transform our sky. Even without the moon, they would glow, reflecting sunlight and making true darkness almost impossible. Stargazing would be very different. Forget about a black, star-filled canvas. The rings would wash the sky in silver light, obscuring all but the brightest stars. Astronomers would have had a much harder time mapping galaxies. Maybe the discovery of the universe beyond Earth would have been delayed centuries. But the biggest impact might be psychological. Think about it. Humans have always stared at the night sky and wondered about our place in the cosmos. The real universe feels vast and empty, and in that emptiness, we discovered physics, astronomy, and our desire to explore. But if massive, glowing rings were always there, dominating the sky, maybe we would have grown up with a more enclosed worldview. Instead of thinking of ourselves as tiny creatures in a giant universe, we might have believed we lived under a cosmic ceiling, a dome painted by the gods. Could that have slowed down the development of science? Or maybe it would have inspired us to reach the rings themselves, to climb to the heavens long before we dreamed of flying to the moon. Eventually, technology would let us visit them. Imagine the first astronauts in the 20th century, not going to the moon, but heading straight into the shimmering bands of rock and ice orbiting our world. The images would make Apollo look like a warm-up act. Instead of a single footprint in the dust, we'd see explorers drifting among glittering arcs of frozen light, circling Earth like cosmic jewelry. So, what if Earth had rings like Saturn? Our skies would be brighter, our myths stranger, our climate cooler, and our history radically different. Maybe humanity would have advanced faster, maybe slower, but one thing is certain: we would never, ever stop looking up.